Another Saturday, another UFC main event. And I'm here to break it down, make a prediction, and see how we do for the year of 2024. So, this week we have a rematch between Chris Curtis and Brendan All In Allen. Brendan Allen, one of the most tribal American men with his nice tribal tattoos and wearing animal skin on his hat. So let's just go through the records and stats and then their fight experience and see how they do. So Chris Curtis, age 36, 5'10", 75.5-inch reach. Brendan Allen is 6'2", so 4 inches taller, 75-inch reach, a half inch less in reach, and 28 years old, 8 years younger. Let's start off with Chris Curtis's record. Both of these guys have pretty recent win streaks. So Chris Curtis gets into the UFC, fights against Phil Hawes, just kind of like doing his thing, being defensive, and then counters with his left hand, knocks him out. Same thing with Brendan Allen, pretty much. He rocks him and then just finishes him off with knees. Against Adolfo Vieira, he pretty much just defends all of Vieira's takedowns and wins a decision against that. Then we all thought that he would do the exact same thing against Jack Hermansson, but Hermansson had other plans and just kind of styles on him. Not really landing anything too significant, but just being very active over the course of their 15-minute fight and easily just being more technical than Chris Curtis. This is kind of where the idea that Chris Curtis is just a worse version of Sean Strickland comes into play, where when Sean Strickland was fighting Jack Hermansson, Jack kind of did the exact same thing, where he just got on his bike, was very active in terms of moving around the octagon, was very active in terms of throwing strikes, throwing jabs, throwing leg kicks against Sean Strickland. But because of Strickland's defense and because of his jab, he was able to overcome that and win a split. I think it was a split decision over Jack Hermansson, where Chris Curtis was not. Then we have Chris Curtis against Joaquin Buckley. I thought Curtis was going to win this fight, but he did lose the first round. But, it's kind of just like it was reminiscent of the Phil Hawes fight, where Buckley is just a heavy hitter. He doesn't... Whoops, sorry about that. Buckley's just a heavy hitter. He doesn't really have too many more skills than that. And Curtis was able to find his chin eventually, catching a kick in the second round, even though he did lose the first round. Against Kelvin Gastelum, Gastelum came out looking great, and Chris Curtis does what he kind of does best, where he just ground him down over the course of the fight. That was actually a pretty good performance from Chris Curtis. I would say it's one of his best because of how much damage he was actually able to do to Kelvin Gastelum. And he eventually wore him down and was like beating the hell out of him. But, against guys that can move, Chris Curtis has trouble finding the chin. And we can go through some of his knockdowns, but he doesn't actually set his strikes up super well, and he's just kind of relying on catching his opponent. And this should probably be a win for Chris Curtis, because Kelvin Gastelum did get the benefit of a clash of heads that really rocked Curtis in the second round. And because of that, Kelvin won the second round on all of the judges' scorecards. When, the fight probably should have been stopped, or at least reset, and Curtis should have been given a chance to recover. Then he fights Nasruddin Imavov, gets completely destroyed in round 2. They clash heads, and he can't continue. So that should have been a loss for Curtis. So he should have one more win and one loss instead of a loss and a no contest. Then he fights Marc-Andre Barriault and wins a split decision. I thought it was a pretty clear win for Chris Curtis, but, all of the rounds were pretty close, and they were in Canada, so. All right, Brendan Allen. So Brendan Allen comes in, he fights Carl Roberson in wins by heel hook in round 1 in 2021. Then he fights Punahele Soriano in 2021. He fights Chris Curtis. I remember this fight. He was just like kind of styling on him, and then Curtis lands a good punch, rocking him. And I was not super high on. I was not super high on Brendan Allen. Like, I know that he had good striking because he was able to kind of outstrike Punahele, and he had good grappling because of the heel hook that he had over Carl Roberson. But the fact that he got knocked out by Chris Curtis wasn't a great look on him. He should have beaten Sam Alvey in round one, let's just be honest, when he fought him in 2022. But he does choke him out in round two of their fight. And then he decisions Jacob Malkoun. He chokes out Krzysztof Jotko in round one. When he choked out Andre Muniz, I was pretty impressed. But at the time, I was more unimpressed by Andre Muniz. He kind of let down my expectations rather than Chris Curtis rising to meet them. Then he fights Bruno Silva. That was a fight that I thought, I wasn't actually sure who was going to win that fight, but I was kind of leaning towards Brendan Allen. But the fact he got rocked by Bruno Silva, but then he was able to come back, rock Silva, and then choke him out with a RNC in round one. That was a really impressive win. And then against Paul Craig, I knew that was kind of going uphill for Paul Craig. Allen's the younger fighter, and his skill set is not a good matchup up against Craig. He just is cleaner striking, and I'd say a bit of cleaner grappling for MMA. And yeah, he was able to just land vicious ground and pound on him, eventually finishing him off with a rear naked choke in round three. So now he's fighting Chris Curtis. So I've said it before, Chris Curtis is kind of just the worst version of Sean Strickland. He literally says, like in the promo to this, he doesn't really have a game plan. He just goes in there, fights. He likes to do what he does against Sean Strickland, which is just kind of grind in the gym. That's how they spar in the gym, and that's how they fight. They just go in there. They don't really move their feet. They just stand in the pocket and trade. So Chris Curtis doesn't like it when guys won't stand in the pocket and trade with him. Calvin Gastelum didn't stand in the pocket and trade. Jack Hermanson didn't stand in the pocket and trade. Nasruddin Imavov definitely didn't stand in the pocket. You know who did? Marc-Andre Barriault. Brendan Allen didn't really, but Phil Hodges. Adolfo Vieira kept going for takedowns, which he was able to just stuff. So he loves that. He loves when guys are just going to like trade with him because that's how he spars. And that also kind of brings me to his defense, where his defense is a lot of trunk, head movement, and arm blocking. Maybe we can see some footage, but he doesn't use a lot of footwork to defend positionally. He will let guys throw strikes and just kind of try to get out of the way. And even in this promo, let me see if I can actually find the promo, because it's pretty telling. He's like, I'm going to go, when I went in there against Brendan Allen the first time, in my mind, my thought process was, if I win, that'd be great. If I lose, I've lost before. He doesn't really care. Chris Curtis is 36 years old. This isn't a case of you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but he's been fighting the same way for so long, it's hard for me to see him adding new wrinkles to his game now at this late date. Brendan Allen, on the other hand, I think is improving as a fighter. He has looked better and better against, in theory, tougher competition, finishing Andre Muniz, Bruno Silva, and Paul Craig, who I believe all were, at least at one point, ranked in the middleweight division. Jacob Malkoun is another good grindy fighter that he's won against. I don't like Brendan Allen as a fighter. I think that he was very cocky when he was coming into the UFC, and he gets knocked out against Sean Strickland. After that fight, he's like, oh, I'm going to be able to beat Sean Strickland. Just give me a rematch. Then he fights Chris Curtis, Sean Strickland's little lapdog, who's just the worst version of him. Loses to him, too. I'm like, okay, give me a break. And then also beating Sam Alvey. I'm like, who hasn't beaten Sam Alvey at this point? But you just cannot deny his last 5 wins. Jacob Malkoun, just a brutal grinder that no one wants to see in the octagon. Krzysztof Jotko, pretty good kickboxer, not great. Andre Muniz, great jiu-jitsu, decent striking, just got outworked by Brendan Allen. Bruno Silva also got outworked by Brendan Allen. Even though he rocked Allen in their first round, he himself got rocked and then choked out. Undeniable. Paul Craig, that was just a shutout. Brendan Allen's on a roll. I believe he's ranked number 6 at middleweight. Let's see here. Middleweight. So Brendan Allen's ranked number 6. Chris Curtis is number 14. Yeah. Let's just do some footage breakdown. Here's Curtis versus Buckley. So Buckley throws a kick, Curtis catches it, and then comes up with a left hand, just rocks Buckley, drops him, and from there he's able to just finish the job with ground and pound. So that's just an example of Chris Curtis catching someone. You can't be caught lacking on in terms of your footwork when you're fighting Chris Curtis. However, Chris Curtis doesn't have great footwork himself, so if you do have good footwork and you can get in and out, then you don't really have to worry too much. Obviously, he can still catch you with punches with his counter strikes. But the fact that he's so flat-footed does leave him open to leg kicks. That's something Brendan Allen can take advantage of. The other thing that he can use because of Chris Curtis's flat-footedness is just takedowns. Chris Curtis likes to use trunk movement. He also likes to use his hands to defend himself. He reacts to strikes. He's very vulnerable to feints. This was a great feint by Imavov. Let's rewind the clock just to take a look at this. Where Imavov feints a jab, Chris Curtis defends. He just steps in. Gets the rear body lock immediately. And from there, he's able to just interlace the legs and take him down. Chris Curtis has good takedown defense against traditional takedowns in MMA, where you just drive him into the cage. Against Adolfo Vieira, we saw him defend a lot of takedowns. Adolfo Vieira does not have good MMA grappling. Let's just say that. Don't let Chris Curtis lean up against the cage if you want to try to take him down. And if you do, you can't just continuously try to hunt for the traditional double or single. You're going to have to change your angles. You're going to have to go for trips. That's something that Brendan Allen can do. Let's take a look at Brendan Allen's fight against Paul Craig here. He had a pretty good takedown in round 1. I just want to go back and find that. Here we go. This is just a good trip. Obviously, it's a little bit different because Chris Curtis is going to be trying to stay away from the clinch where Paul Craig was going into it. But knee to the body. And then he just turns around, trips him. And gets a good takedown from there. I also want to talk about the choke that Brendan Allen got, because I definitely can see this being a scenario where Chris Curtis is working to get back up to his feet. Brendan Allen's in a half guard or side control position. He just follows him up and easily transitions to the back, slipping that arm underneath. Brendan Allen has a really good rear naked choke. It's one of my favorite parts about his game. And from there, he doesn't even really need both hooks in. It's just very tight. And even against a jiu-jitsu specialist such as Paul Craig, it is just too much of a joke. Let's take a look at some more takedowns that Nasruddin got on Curtis. Curtis has a good jab, but you can just see how bad his footwork is. Like, he literally leans over his rear leg or his front leg and just gets off balance. Just slipping under Curtis's winging punches, getting a body lock. That's something that Allen can do so easily. And let's see how Imavov actually gets him down. He doesn't go for the double leg. He doesn't go for a single leg. He just steps over his legs, leans his chest forward, tripping Curtis and getting him down to the cage. So, how's this fight going to play out? Well, I don't like either of these fighters' fighting styles, but Brendan Allen is definitely improving. His grappling is getting much better, and I think he's making smarter decisions as a fighter. Chris Curtis is the same old bad decision maker. He just likes to spar. That's kind of his thing. He doesn't want a game plan. He doesn't want to deviate from what he likes doing, which is standing in the middle of the cage and just trying to avoid your punches, not by moving his feet, but just by moving his arms and body, and try to land his punches, try to knock you out. He'll defend takedowns. He's not in love with it, and it really looks like he only trains double legs, single leg takedown defense against the cage. So, can Brendan Allen get him down? Yes, I think he can get him down. Can Brendan Allen outstrike him? I think he can. I think it's dangerous, especially over the course of 5 rounds. Chris Curtis is pretty good at conserving his output. I think Brendan Allen's going to choke out Chris Curtis here. I know he lost like 3 years ago. I know he got knocked out. But he was outstriking Chris Curtis until he got caught, as, to be fair, all of Chris Curtis's opponents do, even if they don't eventually get caught. I don't think Chris Curtis has the grappling. I don't think he has the takedown defense. I think that his takedown defense is similar to Sean Strickland's, where if he's in the middle of the cage and the guys just go for a blast double and kind of overpower it, he's going to be able to get taken down. Once on the ground, I think that Brendan Allen's going to be able to land good ground and pound. And I think he's also going to be able to find a submission. I think he's going to win by rear naked choke, maybe in the 2nd or the 3rd round. I don't think it's going to be round 1. I think he's going to take a few rounds to kind of work on Chris Curtis here. And let's take a look at the odds for this fight. So Brendan Allen is minus 205 favorite. Chris Curtis is a plus 170 underdog. And that makes sense. I don't think that the fight is going to be that much of a difference in skill. I think it's actually going to be a pretty close fight, simply because Chris Curtis's skill set does match up pretty well against Brendan Allen's, at least in theory. But if you kind of take a closer look at how Brendan Allen's wrestling works, I think that his wrestling is going to have a big success against Chris Curtis here. So yeah, Allen's ranked number 6, Curtis is 14, and they have kind of taken a bit of a career trajectory. But don't let these win-losses fool you, because Chris Curtis should have won a few of these losses, and some of Allen's wins were closer than they appear. Anyway, guys, I think I'm probably going to put down like 2 units on Allen. Let me know your predictions in the comments down below. Hope you enjoy the fights. Thanks for watching the video, everyone. Have a great day.